Hey people, it's Nias talking. Now I want to continue in the South African vein and I want to explore the origins of today's problems and explain how the Boers' claims are lies. Now this is an article from the BBC History which calls Apartheid's Roots, the Native Land Act 1913. The Native Land Act helped to lay the groundwork for the apartheid policy of racial segregation in South Africa introduced in 1948. A law passed 100 years ago severely restricting ownership of land for South Africa's majority black population continues to have a huge impact today, 2 decades after the end of apartheid. At its stroke, the passing of the Native Land Act on 19th June 1913 saw the majority of South African land reserved for whites or Europeans. Just 7% of agricultural land was set aside on reserves for blacks or Africans, though they comprised 67% of the population. Okay, again, 67%? No, that's gotta be a lie. I don't even when the Boer population was bigger, I can't imagine that they were 2/3 of the population. And look, you see, from the very beginning, the current situation is unnatural because they used the law to say that nobody could own land. So basically, all the land that was owned was because you forcibly stopped blacks from owning it, therefore they were the only ones who could own it. Okay, let's go. These reserves were to form a key part of the apartheid system. They became the homelands in which different tribal groups were forcibly settled, segregated cheap labor pools. So, for example, the Zulu that lived in Natal and the Xhosa, I'm sorry, they're the only tribes that come to mind right now, but you get the idea. Importantly, Africans were forbidden from buying or leasing land outside these reserves except from other Africans. Europeans likewise were unable to buy or lease land from Africans. But according to William Baynard, Rhodes Professor of Race Relations at the University of Oxford, and Professor Peter Delius of the University of Witwatersrand, land alienation was neither the primary intention nor a major outcome of the legislation. Fun fact, Rhodes Scholars was set up by Cecil Rhodes, who went on a rampage through Zimbabwe and took over that place. That's why it was called Rhodesia. So we can see that this clearly is not biased, is not unbiased. All right, now let's continue. By and large, dispossession had already taken place. Following the colonial wars of the 19th century, the Land Act came at the end of this process, they said, speaking at the Land Divided Conference. But wait. Colonial wars? I thought the Boers keep saying that the land was empty. So who were they fighting in this supposedly empty land? Oh wait, there were people there who already owned it. The 1913 Act was, however, also designed to control the forms of tenancy allowed in the white-owned areas. An increasing proportion of white landowners wanted fuller control over their land. African sharecroppers who cultivated white-owned land and in return shared a portion of the harvest with the landowner lost out significantly. The act did not aim to move black people off the commercial farms, but to keep them there as workers rather than tenants, Baynard and Delius explained. Again, that's just an outright lie. The whole aim was to create Boer domination over South Africa and to reduce black South Africans to second-class, third, fourth, Z-class citizens. Z-class citizens. Let's use that as a term. That's what they wanted, Z-class. Pariahs in the land of their birth. John Dube, the first president of the ANC, then called the South African Native National Congress, or SANCI, had told an African audience in 1912 that if we have no land to live on, we can be no people. Obviously, unsurprisingly, opposition to the act amongst the African population when it came to pass was marked. In his 1916 book, Native Life in South Africa, Saul Plaatje, a prominent activist and co-founder of the ANC, commented that awaking on Friday morning, June 20th, on 1913, the South African native found himself not actually a slave, but a pariah in the land of his birth. His book bewails the plight of black South Africans in the aftermath of the act. Even criminals dropping straight from the gallows have an undisputed claim to 6 feet of ground on which to rest their criminal remains, he wrote. But under the cruel operation of the Native Land Act, little children, whose only crime is that God did not make them white, are sometimes denied that right in their ancestral home. The act remained a focal point of opposition for years to come. In 1994, the ANC, now the majority party in South Africa's first democratically elected government, pledged to redistribute 30% of white-owned agricultural land to black farmers. By 2012, just a third of that figure had been met. Not 30%, 100%, because we can already establish every last piece of it was taken by force or by using the courts to take it from somebody else. Let's not say that any piece of it is rightfully owned by the current owners. In May 2013, Gugiel Nakwinti, South African Minister for Rural Development and Land Reform, announced plans to mark the centenary of the Native Land Act with a call for the country to make a determined national effort to put that act and its implications behind the nation. We can put it behind us when you give the land back. How's about that? However, land remains an emotive issue in South Africa. The influence of the Native Land Act still colors the political and social dialogue. Comments made by the Deputy Minister of Agriculture stirred controversy in 2012. There is sufficient proof that there were no Bantu-speaking people in the Western Cape and Northwestern Cape, said Peter Mulder, also leader of the conservative Freedom Front Plus party. He added that as a result of black South Africans had no historical claim to 40% of South Africa's land surface. You were not native to that land. You just turned up. You have zero claim to any of it. And this is another thing that they keep saying, when if something's empty. Listen, in my city, I could find an empty house, a good 5-bedroom house that's boarded up. The owner's dead, no heirs. Just because it's empty, it does not mean you get to claim that house. There are there's football pitch-sized plots of land that have been demolished where nobody has an owner. They've been empty for like 20 years. You still don't get to say, nobody's using it, it's mine. And I dare any of them to say, would an African be able to go to Holland and say, this house has been empty for 20 years, nobody's using it, there's no heirs and no ownership of it that anyone can claim, let me take it. They throw them straight back to Africa. Let's not lie about that. That line of reasoning would never work. You know, this finders keepers logic. What a load of BS. A year earlier, the former president of the ANC Youth League, Julius Malema, said the land question must be resolved, if needs be, the hard way. He was quoting the 1985 speech of Oliver Tambo, president of the African National Congress, ANC, at that time. Such is the importance of the land reform to the South African political landscape that the government is constitutionally bound to address it. Article 25 of the South African Constitution passed into law on the 10th December 1996. I don't need to read the rest of this, we've already covered that. So anyway, people, as we've demonstrated, there is the current situation where they say that they are the rightful owners or that they did not have any, what's the word? Any malicious act, no malicious act was perpetrated to gain control of the land is obviously a lie. Wars were fought to disenfranchise the previous owners. Then laws were put in place to make sure that they had no right to claim any further land. Okay, I hope that you've enjoyed this. I'm going to leave the article in the description. Please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. Peace, family.